Kara knelt in the shade of a massive, glass-like shard protruding from the desert floor, its edges glinting under the twin suns of Rillis, 7. She adjusted her breathing mask and whispered to herself, "What is it this time?" Her eyes scanned the desolate expanse. Movement on this planet could mean anything: an opportunistic predator, a stray automaton, or worse, a patrol from the Dominion. She didn't flinch when the first shadow emerged over the ridge, a towering quadrupedal drone with spindly, jointed legs. Its head, a menacing oval bristling with sensors, swiveled her way. A second shadow followed, and then a third. Kara tightened her grip on the jagged shard in her hand, its base wrapped in scavenged cloth to prevent it from slicing her palm. The shard was no weapon by design. It was a leftover piece of something ancient, brittle, and likely radioactive. But for Kara, and every humanus in the galaxy, design didn't matter. Intent didn't matter. Everything in the hands of a human could become a weapon. The drones descended the ridge in synchronized motion, scanning the sands for her heat signature. The Dominion didn't like loose ends, and she was the frayed thread they had failed to snip during their purge of Sector Delta. As they advanced, Kara's mind raced. She needed to move. Quickly, she sprinted to the base of another shard, her movements erratic to avoid locking into the drone's targeting algorithms. She crouched behind her new cover, feeling the heat of the shard radiating against her back. The drones began to close the distance, and their targeting lasers flickered against the ground, seeking her position. Kara spotted the loose components in the shard's crystalline structure. This one was larger than most, fractured at its tip where the twin suns had baked it for centuries. She pulled a length of cable from her satchel, a souvenir from her last scavenging trip, and tied it tightly around the shard's base. With her entire weight, she leaned into the cable, pulling the shard until its balance wavered. The drones crept closer. "Come on," she muttered, yanking the cable one last time. The shard groaned, then tipped forward with a sound like shattering glass. It slammed into the desert floor, breaking apart into a cascade of razor-sharp fragments. The drones reacted instantly, their heads snapping toward the crash. Kara leaped from her hiding spot, grabbing a shard fragment mid-sprint, and flung it with all her strength. The fragment embedded itself into the sensor array of the lead drone, sending it reeling as sparks and blue smoke erupted from its core. Kara didn't stop to celebrate. The other two drones were recalibrating, their targeting lasers locking onto her chest. She ducked and rolled, reaching into her satchel again. This time, she pulled out an old metal flask filled with a mix of volatile chemicals scavenged from abandoned factories. It was crude, unstable, and wildly unpredictable, just how she liked it. She lit the rag stuffed into its opening with the friction of a shard against a rock, then hurled it at the nearest drone. The makeshift explosive detonated midair, bathing the drone in a fireball that left its legs twitching and its sensors shattered. Kara turned to face the final drone, which had activated its pulse cannon, a weapon meant to incapacitate targets rather than kill them outright. The Dominion didn't just want humans dead, they wanted them alive for experimentation. She sprinted toward the drone, zigzagging to avoid the cannon's bursts. Each pulse left craters in the sand where she had been moments before. As she closed the distance, she spotted a loose panel on the drone's underside. "Perfect," she whispered. She slid under the machine, narrowly avoiding a downward strike from its legs. Using another shard fragment, she jammed it into the loose panel, prying it open to reveal a tangle of glowing wires. With no time to identify their purpose, she grabbed a handful and yanked. The drone let out a mechanical screech, sparks flying from its joints as its legs buckled. It collapsed into the sand, its sensors going dark. Kara rolled out from under the wreckage, her chest heaving. She wiped the sweat from her brow and took a moment to survey the destruction. 3 drones, incapacitated, with nothing more than shards, wires, and a makeshift explosive. But there was no time to revel in her victory. The Dominion never sent just one patrol. The humanus legacy. The galaxy had long since fallen under the iron grip of the Dominion, a coalition of synthetic beings and augmented humanoids who had decided that baseline humans were too chaotic, too resourceful, and too dangerous to coexist. When the war began centuries ago, humanity's vast cities, fleets, and colonies had been systematically dismantled. The survivors, those deemed pure, had been scattered across desolate planets like Rillis 7, where resources were scarce and survival was a daily battle. It was a calculated move. The Dominion believed that by stripping humanity of its tools, its technology, and its infrastructure, they could extinguish the species. They underestimated what it meant to be human. Kara was part of the new generation, those born into exile, raised to see opportunity in every object, and taught that survival required turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. To the Dominion, the shards of Rillis 7 were just remnants of a dead civilization. To Kara, they were weapons waiting to be used. A warning on the horizon. Kara scavenged what she could from the downed drones, prying off their power cells and salvaging intact wiring. These parts could be bartered with other humanist settlements or used to create more makeshift tools. As she worked, a low hum filled the air. Kara froze, her eyes darting to the horizon. There, glinting in the distance, was a shape she dreaded, a Dominion cruiser. The massive ship hovered just above the desert floor, its shadows stretching for miles. From its underbelly, smaller ships, scout craft, were descending. The Dominion had noticed the destruction of their patrol and sent reinforcements. Kara stuffed the scavenged parts into her satchel and began to run, her mind racing. She needed to reach the shelter of the canyon, where she had hidden her people's last stash of supplies. If she could make it there, she might have a chance to regroup and plan her next move. But as the scout craft descended, she realized she wouldn't make it in time. Her gaze shifted to the terrain around her, cataloging every potential resource: the brittle shards, the chemical deposits leaching from the sand, and even the magnetic anomalies that occasionally cause small, localized disruptions. A plan began to form in her mind. It was reckless, dangerous, and almost certainly suicidal. But that was the thing about being humanus. You didn't survive by playing it safe. The shadow of the Dominion cruiser stretched across the desert, its scout craft fanning out like vultures. Kara sprinted toward the jagged canyon walls, the uneven terrain slowing her down. She didn't need to look back to know the scout craft were gaining on her. The high-pitched whine of their engines told her enough. Her lungs burned as the heat from the twin suns bore down, but her mind stayed sharp. The humanus weren't just survivors. They were tacticians, capable of turning the smallest of advantages into a weapon. And right now, the land itself was her best chance. She reached the base of the canyon, its towering walls providing a temporary reprieve from the relentless heat. Ducking behind a cluster of fallen rocks, she yanked her satchel open and assessed her resources: power cells from the downed drones, scavenged wires, a shard fragment, and a small vial of the chemical slurry she used for her explosives. Not much, but it would have to do. The first scout craft appeared over the ridge, its sleek form bristling with weapons. Its searchlights swept the canyon floor, illuminating the space like daylight. Kara pressed herself against the rocks, her breath shallow. If she couldn't take out at least one of them, the others would box her in. Her fingers worked quickly, attaching the power cell to the shard fragment with a length of wire. It wasn't elegant, but it didn't need to be. The shard would act as a conductor, overloading the power cell and creating an electromagnetic burst strong enough to disrupt the scoutcraft's systems. At least that was the theory. She peeked out from behind the rocks and threw the makeshift device with all her strength. It tumbled end over end through the air, landing just beneath the hovering scoutcraft. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crack, the power cell detonated, sending a burst of energy through the air. The scoutcraft wobbled violently, its engines sputtering as its systems shorted out. Kara watched as it spun out of control and slammed into the canyon wall, exploding in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. But there was no time to celebrate. Two more scout craft appeared over the ridge, their engines roaring. Canyon chaos. Kara ran deeper into the canyon, her mind racing through the options. The canyon walls were unstable, riddled with cracks from centuries of seismic activity. If she could cause a collapse, she might trap the scout craft, or at least buy herself some time. She scanned the walls, her eyes landing on a series of precarious boulders balanced high above. Perfect! Digging into her satchel, she retrieved the vial of chemical slurry. It was her last one, and she had no idea if the mixture would be enough to trigger a collapse. But it was all she had. Kara scaled the nearest rock formation, her muscles aching from exertion. The scout craft circled above, their searchlights sweeping dangerously close. She reached the top and positioned the vial against a crack in the canyon wall, using another shard fragment to wedge it in place. She struck the shard against the rock, creating a spark that ignited the chemical slurry. The vial hissed and then detonated with a sharp boom, the force shaking the canyon walls. Above her, the boulders shifted, their balance disrupted. The scout craft reacted immediately, their sensors locking onto her position. A burst of plasma fire erupted, searing the rocks around her. Kara threw herself off the ledge just as the boulders came crashing down. The sound was deafening. Dust and debris filled the air as massive rocks tumbled into the canyon, striking one of the scout craft and sending it spiraling to the ground. The other managed to evade the collapse, hovering just beyond the rubble. Kara hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of her. She rolled to her feet, coughing through the dust. Her ears rang, but she forced herself to focus. One scout craft down, one to go. A deadly game. The final scout craft was more cautious now, its movements deliberate as it scanned the debris for her. Kara knew it wouldn't make the same mistake twice. She needed to draw it in, closer to the ground where it was more vulnerable. Her gaze fell on a nearby pool of shimmering liquid, a natural deposit of magnetic ore that leaked to the surface in places. The Dominion synthetic systems were highly susceptible to magnetic interference, and Kara had learned long ago how to exploit that. She grabbed a length of wire from her satchel and dipped it into the ore, coating it thoroughly. Wrapping the wire around another shard fragment, she crafted a crude electromagnetic sling. It wasn't much, but if she could get close enough to the scout craft, it might disrupt its propulsion systems. The scout craft hovered just above the rubble, its sensors sweeping methodically. Kara crouched low, using the canyon's uneven terrain to stay out of sight. She crept closer, her improvised weapon in hand. When she was within range, she leaped from cover and hurled the shard at the craft's exposed underside. The shard struck true, the magnetic ore causing an immediate short circuit in the scout craft's propulsion systems. The craft sputtered and tilted, its engines whining as it struggled to stay aloft. Kara didn't give it a chance to recover. She sprinted toward the craft, grabbing another shard fragment from the ground. With a feral cry, she jumped onto the craft's side, using the shard to pry open an access panel. Sparks flew as she tore at the exposed wires, ripping out anything that looked important. The scout craft let out a mechanical screech as it spiraled out of control, crashing into the canyon floor in a fiery explosion. Kara rolled clear of the wreckage, her chest heaving. She was covered in dust and sweat, her muscles screaming in protest. But she was alive. The signal. The canyon fell silent, the echoes of the battle fading into the distance. Kara sat against a rock, catching her breath. She had taken out the patrol, but she knew it was only a matter of time before more would come. The Dominion didn't tolerate resistance, and they wouldn't stop until she, and every other humanus, was eliminated. Her gaze drifted to the wreckage of the scout craft, a thought nagging at the back of her mind. The Dominion's ships were always connected to their network, transmitting data back to their command centers. If she could access the craft systems, she might be able to intercept their communications, or even send a message of her own. It was a long shot, but it was worth trying. Kara approached the wreckage cautiously, prying open the remains of the scout craft's control panel. The circuitry was badly damaged, but the comms unit appeared intact. She connected a salvaged power cell to the unit, coaxing it back to life. The screen flickered, displaying a stream of data in the Dominion's cryptic language. Kara's fingers moved deftly across the interface, bypassing security protocols and searching for the right frequency. Finally, she found it, a direct link to the Dominion's network. Her heart raced as she began to type, broadcasting a single, defiant message. Humanus alive. We are weapons. And we are coming.
The Dominion cruiser hung in the sky like an ominous metal monolith, its searchlights combing the canyon floor. Kara crouched in the shadows, her body taut as a coiled spring. The message she'd broadcast had done its job. The Dominion wasn't just searching for her anymore, they were furious. The air hummed with the vibrations of descending dropships. These weren't scout craft meant for reconnaissance. No, this was a hunter-killer squad, and their directive was clear. Find the humanus who had dared to defy them and eliminate the threat. Kara smiled grimly. Let's see who eliminates who, she muttered, tightening the straps on her satchel. Her mind raced through the possibilities. She was out of chemical slurry, down to just a few power cells, and whatever scraps of metal and wire she could salvage from the wreckage. But scarcity was the mother of invention, and Kara knew how to turn scarcity into chaos. The first of the hunter-killers landed with a metallic thud, its legs unfolding like those of a predatory insect. Its head swiveled, sensors whirring as it scanned for any sign of her. Two others followed, their glossy black exteriors gleaming in the canyon's filtered light. These were faster, stronger, and smarter than the drones or scout craft she'd faced earlier. But Kara wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to send a message. The power of distraction. Kara ducked into a narrow crevice, her mind calculating distances and angles. The Dominion operated on precision and efficiency. She would counter them with unpredictability. She rigged one of the salvaged power cells into a crude EMP grenade, wrapping it in layers of conductive wire and stabilizing it with a piece of shard crystal. The makeshift device hummed faintly in her hand. It was unstable and likely to explode if she dropped it, but that was part of the plan. Taking a deep breath, she lobbed the grenade toward the lead hunter-killer. The device arced through the air, landing near the machine's feet with a sharp clang. The hunter-killer paused, its sensors locking onto the object. Then, with a burst of light and sound, the grenade detonated, sending a pulse of electromagnetic energy rippling through the canyon. The lead machine stumbled, its systems momentarily disrupted. Kara seized the opportunity, sprinting toward the second hunter-killer. She slid beneath its legs, slashing at its jointed limbs with a shard fragment. Sparks flew as the shard bit into the metal, severing hydraulic lines. The machine collapsed with a mechanical screech, its limbs flailing. But the third hunter-killer was faster. It turned toward her, its weaponized appendages bristling with plasma cannons. Kara rolled to the side as a searing beam of light scorched the ground where she'd been standing, turning the tide. Kara retreated deeper into the canyon, the hunter-killer pursuing her relentlessly. Its plasma bolts blasted chunks out of the canyon walls, sending debris raining down around her. She darted into a natural alcove, her mind racing. The alcove's walls were slick with a strange, viscous substance, an organic compound unique to Rillis 7. Kara had encountered it before. In its raw state, it was inert, but when heated, it became volatile. A dangerous plan formed in her mind. She grabbed the last power cell from her satchel and carefully punctured it with a shard fragment. Blue energy began to seep from the cell, the core growing hotter by the second. Timing was everything. Kara coated the power cell in the organic compound, using her hands to smear the substance across its surface. She threw the makeshift incendiary at the hunter-killer, aiming for its exposed central processor. The device struck true, detonating in a fiery burst that engulfed the machine. The organic compound burned brightly, its flames licking at the hunter-killer's glossy exterior. The machine convulsed, its systems overloading as the fire consumed it. Kara shielded her face from the heat, her heart pounding. When the flames died down, the hunter-killer lay in a smoldering heap, its chassis blackened and deformed. She allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. 3 down. But the Dominion cruiser was still hovering above, and reinforcements were likely already on their way. The Humanus network. Kara scavenged what she could from the remains of the hunter-killers, salvaging wires, circuits, and fragments of their armor. As she worked, a crackle of static came from her satchel. She froze, then pulled out the comms unit she'd taken from the scout craft earlier. The screen flickered to life, displaying a string of distorted symbols. Kara adjusted the frequency, her heart skipping a beat when a voice broke through the static. "Repeat, this is Outpost Vega. If you're Humanus, respond." Kara's grip tightened on the device. Outpost Vega was one of the fabled Humanus strongholds, a place of safety and resistance rumored to exist far beyond the Dominion's reach. "This is Kara," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm on Rilis 7. The Dominion's here. I've taken out a patrol, but I'm running out of options." There was a pause, then the voice replied, "Kara, this is Commander Bryn. Hold your position. We're sending extraction coordinates. Whatever you do, don't let them take you alive." The signal cut out, leaving Kara alone with the weight of the message. Extraction was coming, but so was the Dominion. She glanced at the wreckage around her, her mind already piecing together a plan. A stand against the Dominion. The ground beneath Kara trembled as another wave of dropships descended, their engines roaring. She had minutes, maybe seconds, before the next attack began. But this time she wasn't just a lone survivor. She was a beacon of defiance, a symbol of what the Dominion feared most: human ingenuity. She began rigging her scavenged parts into a final trap, her hands moving with purpose. The hunter-killer's armor fragments became shrapnel, its circuits rewired into a proximity trigger. The power cores she'd salvaged from the drones formed the explosive core of her device. When the Dominion forces arrived, they would walk into a field of improvised death. As she worked, Kara's mind drifted to the voice from Outpost Vega. Humanity wasn't gone, not entirely. There were others like her, fighting, surviving, resisting. And if she could hold the line here, she might give them a chance. The first dropship appeared on the horizon, its silhouette framed by the setting suns. Kara stood, her trap laid, and gripped her shard fragment tightly. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. The Dominion dropships descended like predators, their engines screaming as they deployed waves of mechanized enforcers into the canyon. Kara stood atop a jagged outcropping, her gaze steady. Below her, the traps she'd set shimmered faintly, concealed by the canyon's natural debris. The Dominion thought they were the apex force, a flawless machine that couldn't be outwitted. But they hadn't accounted for the humanus ability to turn desperation into dominance. Her comms unit crackled to life again. "Kara, extraction inbound," said Commander Bryn's voice, calm but urgent. "ETA 20 minutes. Hold the line." 20 minutes. Against a Dominion assault. Kara flexed her fingers around her shard fragment, her lips curling into a defiant smirk. 20 minutes is an eternity. Let's give them a show. The first wave. The enforcers moved with precision, their metallic bodies gleaming in the fading sunlight. They fanned out across the canyon, their sensors sweeping for life signs. Kara crouched low, her heart pounding as the first wave approached. The lead enforcer stepped onto a hidden tripwire. A moment later, a cascade of shrapnel erupted from a concealed explosive, tearing through its armored exterior. The enforcer crumpled, its systems sparking as it hit the ground. The blast drew the attention of the others. They converged on the trap's origin, unaware that Kara had rigged a second device nearby. This one was a pressure-triggered mine, crafted from the remains of a hunter-killer's propulsion core. When the enforcer stepped onto it, the mine detonated with a fiery boom, sending fragments of rock and metal flying. Kara used the chaos to her advantage, leaping down from her perch and striking at the remaining enforcers. Her shard fragments sliced through their joints and exposed wiring with brutal efficiency. She moved like a shadow, her blows precise and devastating. But for every enforcer she destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The Dominion's numbers were overwhelming and Kara's resources were dwindling. The commander arrives. A new sound filled the air, a low, resonating hum that made the ground tremble. Kara looked up to see a massive Dominion commander unit descending from one of the dropships. This wasn't like the scout craft or the hunter-killers she'd faced before. The commander stood over 15 feet tall, its form bristling with weapons. Its single glowing eye scanned the battlefield, locking onto Kara with an unsettling precision. Humanus identified, the machine intoned in a deep, mechanical voice. Objective: termination. Kara's throat tightened, but she forced herself to focus. She had one last trap, a chain reaction of explosives buried beneath the canyon floor. If she could lure the commander to the center of the trap, she might have a chance to take it out. The commander moved toward her, its steps shaking the ground. Kara sprinted toward the trap, her pulse racing. Plasma bolts rained down around her, scorching the rocks and sending debris flying. She reached the center of the trap and skidded to a halt, turning to face the towering machine. "Come on," she muttered, gripping the detonator tightly. "Just a little closer." The commander hesitated, its sensors analyzing the terrain. For a moment, Kara thought it might detect the trap. But then it stepped forward, its massive foot pressing onto the trigger plate. Kara hit the detonator. The canyon erupted in a cascade of explosions. The ground beneath the commander gave way, swallowing the machine in a fiery collapse. Kara was thrown backward by the force of the blast, her ears ringing and her vision blurred. When the dust settled, the commander lay in a smoking heap, its body mangled and motionless. Extraction. Kara staggered to her feet, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. The canyon was eerily quiet now, the remains of the Dominion forces scattered across the battlefield. A shadow fell over her, and she looked up to see a sleek humanus dropship descending. Its engines hummed softly as it landed, the ramp lowering to reveal a squad of armed humanus fighters. Kara, one of them called out, rushing to her side. She nodded, her legs barely holding her up. "Took you long enough?" The fighter grinned, helping her onto the dropship. Inside, Commander Bryn stood waiting, his imposing figure exuding authority. "You've done more than hold the line," Bryn said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've sent a message the Dominion won't forget?" Kara slumped into a seat, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. "They'll come back," she said. "They always do." Bryn's expression hardened. "Then we'll be ready. Thanks to you, they know what humanus are capable of. Everything is a weapon in our hands, and that's what makes us unstoppable." As the dropship rose into the sky, leaving the battlefield behind, Kara allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in years she felt hope.